Emma Blake was only 17 when she vanished the night her foster father, Ray Carter, was found stabbed to death in their kitchen, and sitting silently beside his body covered in blood was his wife Linda. What began as a tragic domestic crime quickly unraveled into a twisted web of manipulation, obsession, and betrayal that no one in Maple Glen saw coming. But as secrets surfaced and lies crumbled, one chilling question remained: was Emma a victim or the architect of murder? Emma Blake had never known what a real home felt like. Bounced from one foster house to another since the age of 6, she'd grown used to beige walls, polite smiles, and temporary rooms that were never quite hers. When she was placed with the Carters just a month after her 17th birthday, she wasn't expecting anything different: another trial, another place to survive until graduation. But the Carter home in the quiet town of Maple Glen seemed different. It was a cozy 2-story house tucked behind a row of elms on a clean suburban street. The yard was neatly trimmed, the porch decorated with seasonal wreaths. It didn't look like a place that held secrets. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and fresh laundry greeted her. Linda Carter had baked cookies that afternoon just because, and Ray Carter had offered to help with her bags even before introductions were made. They looked like the couple on the cover of a family magazine. She had seen people like this before, the kind who pretended well for social workers, but the warmth in their voices felt too practiced, almost rehearsed. Still, Emma tried not to overthink it. The first few weeks passed quietly. Linda was a nurse who worked overnight shifts at the local hospital. She was soft-spoken, tidy, always reminding Emma about homework, meals, and vitamins. Ray worked from home as a freelance contractor, often in his downstairs office. He was friendly in a way that made Emma uneasy. Too many compliments, too many questions about her day. But he never crossed any lines, not at first. It was the kind of attention that was easy to ignore, to brush off as harmless. After all, this was the most stable place she'd ever lived. Emma enrolled at Maple Glen High and quickly caught the attention of her classmates. She was quiet, artistic, and different in a way that drew people in. Tyler Nash, a senior with a soft spot for strays, struck up a friendship that soon turned into something more. Emma liked Tyler. He was safe, steady, someone who didn't ask for much but gave her space to be herself. He made her laugh, helped her forget the years of bouncing around, of being forgotten. Things started to feel normal, dangerously normal. But even in comfort, Emma never let herself settle completely. She began to notice strange details. Ray would hover nearby when she was alone in the kitchen, often asking if she needed help with simple things like boiling water or drying dishes. Once she caught him standing outside her bedroom door in the middle of the night, pretending to look for a misplaced charger. Another time, she found her journal slightly out of place on the desk, pages dog-eared as if someone had been reading it. Linda, always exhausted from her long shifts, never seemed to notice. Emma tried to push these thoughts away. She had been paranoid before, misreading kindness as manipulation. She told herself she was overreacting, but a strange tension began to grow inside the house, something unspoken. The air changed when Linda was gone overnight. Ray's questions became more personal. He started watching her more closely, his smiles longer, his touches lingering just a second too long. Still, he never gave her anything concrete to fight against. No clear line was crossed, and that made it worse. Late one evening, Emma went downstairs for water and found Ray watching an old home video alone in the dark. On the screen was a younger girl, someone who looked eerily like Emma, laughing in a birthday hat. Ray didn't notice her watching. He just sat there, completely still, his face lit by the flickering screen. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She began keeping her door locked. She stopped journaling. Something told her that the Carter house wasn't what it seemed, and that she wasn't just another foster daughter to Ray Carter. Chapter 2. Emma's unease grew with each passing day, though she couldn't explain exactly why. It wasn't that anything obvious had happened. There were no bruises, no threats, no shouted words, but something had changed in the atmosphere of the Carter home. It was like walking through a house with the windows shut tight and all the lights dimmed. She started hearing noises at night, soft footsteps outside her room, the faint click of her door handle being tested, creaks on the stairs that didn't belong to the usual rhythm of the house settling. At first, she told herself it was just her imagination. The house was old. Wood shifted. Pipes groaned. But then her things began to move. Her phone charger disappeared for 2 days and reappeared under her bed, unplugged and slightly bent. A pair of underwear went missing from her drawer, then turned up behind the bathroom sink. She tried to mention it casually to Linda, but the older woman barely looked up from her cup of tea and just nodded. "Things get misplaced when you're tired," she said, not even making eye contact. Emma didn't press. Something told her not to. Ray, meanwhile, had shifted into a new version of himself. His presence was constant. If Emma was in the kitchen, he'd suddenly appear to ask if she wanted coffee. If she went outside to read, he'd follow, offering advice about gardening or asking questions about her past, deep, unsettling questions, like how she dealt with loneliness or whether she believed in fate. He had a way of making everything sound innocent on the surface, but underneath, there was an intensity that unnerved her. One afternoon, she caught him staring at her from his office window as she walked up the driveway. He didn't look away when she noticed. He just stood there, expressionless, as if watching a television screen. Later that evening, she found a sticky note on her bathroom mirror. Just 2 words, written in faint pencil: "You're perfect." She never mentioned it to anyone. She peeled it off, flushed it down the toilet, and stayed up most of the night, staring at her door. Tyler was the only source of comfort she had left. When she was with him, it felt like the weight lifted off her chest, even if only for an hour. But she couldn't explain everything she was going through. How could she tell him she was afraid in a house that looked so normal, that she suspected something but had no proof? Instead, she told him half-truths, that she missed her old school, that Linda and Ray were strict, that she wasn't sleeping well. Tyler listened, but Emma could see the questions forming in his eyes. Then came the night that changed everything. Linda was working the overnight shift. Emma was in her room sketching when the power went out. The house fell into complete silence. Not even the hum of the refrigerator remained. She grabbed her phone for light, its screen glowing weakly, and stepped into the hallway. The rest of the house was in total darkness. She started to descend the stairs when she heard it, the soft click of a camera shutter. Once, then again, frozen in place, Emma strained her ears. Another click, then footsteps. Someone was moving around the living room. Her heart thundered in her chest. She backed up slowly, quietly, until she reached her room again. She locked the door and pushed the dresser against it. All night she didn't sleep. The power returned hours later, just before dawn. When she finally opened the door, the house was spotless, quiet, ordinary. Too ordinary. She checked her phone. A new photo had appeared in her gallery. It wasn't hers. It showed her asleep, taken from the foot of her bed. Emma deleted it in a panic, then dropped the phone. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Someone had been in her room while she slept, and she knew exactly who. Chap 3. Tyler Nash wasn't the kind of boy who jumped to conclusions, but something about Emma's behavior had begun to deeply concern him. The bright, curious girl he'd started dating just a month ago was slowly becoming someone else. Quiet, jumpy, distracted. Her texts had grown shorter, her phone calls rushed. She no longer wanted to hang out after school, and when they did meet up, her eyes constantly flicked around as if she expected someone to be watching. He tried to ask her what was wrong, but she always changed the subject. She smiled when she didn't mean it. She hugged him without warmth. It felt like she was slipping through his fingers, and he didn't know how to pull her back. One afternoon after school, he offered to walk her home. She declined, more forcefully than usual, insisting she had things to do and couldn't be late. It was a small thing, but it set off something in him, a feeling he couldn't shake. So he followed her. He didn't plan to. Not really. He just got in his car and kept a distance as Emma left the school, walking quickly down the sidewalk. Instead of heading home like she said, she took a sharp turn onto an unfamiliar street and eventually climbed into a car parked behind a row of storage units. Tyler slowed as he drove past. His heart sank when he recognized the driver. It was Ray Carter. Ray didn't look like a man giving his foster daughter a ride. He was too close to her, his arm draped casually behind her headrest. They sat in the car for almost 20 minutes. Tyler parked further down the street and watched, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. He couldn't hear anything, but their body language said enough. When Ray reached out to brush a piece of hair behind Emma's ear, Tyler felt a mix of confusion, anger, and dread bloom in his chest. Emma didn't resist. She didn't recoil, but she didn't smile either. Later that night, he couldn't sleep. The image of the two of them together haunted him. He kept replaying it, trying to make sense of what he had seen. It didn't look like abuse, not in the obvious way. It looked like something darker, something mutual, but that made no sense. Ray was nearly 30 years older. He was her foster father. Tyler's thoughts spiraled until he couldn't take it anymore. The next day, while Emma was in class, he did something he wasn't proud of. He broke into her locker. It wasn't locked tightly. Emma often forgot to spin the dial. Inside, he found her textbooks, a crumpled sketch pad, a half-eaten protein bar, and a second phone. It was thin, older, and taped to the underside of a notebook. Tyler's stomach turned as he powered it on. There were no games, no contacts, only messages, dozens of them, from a number saved under the name R. He read the text, heart pounding faster with each line. Can't stop thinking about last night. You know what we have is special. She's gone until 5. Come down when you hear the second knock. Photos were mixed in, grainy, dimly lit pictures of Emma curled on the couch, of her asleep, of her sitting in Ray's truck. Some of them made Tyler want to throw the phone across the hall. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. Something was happening, something sick and wrong. He had to do something. But how? When he confronted Emma later that day in the parking lot, she froze. He showed her the phone. Her eyes went wide with panic, not guilt. She snatched it from his hand and begged him not to tell anyone. Her voice cracked. She kept glancing around, afraid someone might be listening. Tyler had never seen her like that, shaking, terrified, small. He wanted to protect her, but now he wasn't sure if she was a victim or a willing participant in something monstrous. Chapter 4. Linda Carter had always considered herself a good judge of character. She'd spent years working as a nurse, learning to read people in crisis, spotting pain behind forced smiles, recognizing stress in the smallest gestures. When she and Ray first began fostering teenagers, she believed they were doing something meaningful, giving troubled kids a second chance at life. Ray had seemed so committed to the idea, so patient and warm. He was the one who pushed to take in Emma, insisting that the girl just needed the right environment to thrive. But now, Linda couldn't ignore the tension that had seeped into the walls of their home. Emma was pulling away. She barely spoke at dinner. She avoided eye contact. Her door was always locked. And Ray had changed too. He was more possessive of his time, more defensive when she asked questions. He began keeping his office locked, saying it was to protect sensitive paperwork. His phone, once left openly on counters and nightstands, was now always tucked away in his back pocket or placed face down on silent mode. He had even changed his passwords without telling her. At first, Linda told herself it was just growing pains. Teenagers were difficult. Foster parenting was hard. But the coincidences piled up until they no longer felt like coincidences. One night, after returning early from an overnight shift, she found Ray and Emma sitting on opposite sides of the couch. A movie played, but neither was watching it. Emma jumped when Linda walked in. Ray acted like nothing was strange, but Emma wouldn't meet her gaze. After that, Linda began watching more closely. She noticed the way Ray hovered when Emma entered a room, the long glances, the subtle smirks. Emma would flinch sometimes when Ray touched her shoulder or brushed past her in the hallway. These were not the normal rhythms of a father and daughter, even a foster one. Something was wrong. The final straw came when Linda was cleaning out Ray's car. He had asked her to drop it off for servicing, and as she gathered receipts and wrappers from the glove compartment, she found a folded invoice for a local motel 2 nights, paid in cash, during a weekend she'd been on shift. The name registered to the room was a fake, but the handwriting on the receipt was unmistakably Ray's. Her hands trembled as she held the slip of paper. She didn't want to believe what her mind was screaming, but deep down she already did. That night, while Ray was asleep, Linda made a decision. She bought a cheap motion-activated camera from a 24-hour electronics store and installed it discreetly in the living room, tucked inside a hollowed-out decorative plant. She told herself she was being paranoid. But part of her wanted to know. Needed to know what was really happening. 2 nights later, she got her answer. Ray thought no one was watching. Linda had scheduled an extra shift at the hospital that evening, or so he believed. Emma came downstairs around midnight, looking hesitant and drained. Ray greeted her not like a father, but like a man expecting something more. Linda watched on the small screen of her tablet as Ray pulled Emma into an embrace that lasted far too long. There was no resistance from Emma, but there was no affection either. Only compliance and shame. Linda sat frozen, the tablet shaking in her hands. The footage was only 30 seconds long, but it confirmed everything. Her husband wasn't just inappropriate, he was a predator. And Emma, whether complicit or coerced, was trapped in something neither of them could explain away. The next morning, Linda didn't go to work. She didn't speak a word to either of them. She sat at the kitchen table staring at her wedding ring, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The betrayal cut deeper than she thought possible. Something inside her had snapped, and whatever came next, she knew, would be irreversible. Chapter 5. It was the sound of screaming that shattered the silence of Maple Glen's most peaceful street. A neighbor, startled by the sharp clatter of broken glass followed by a series of frantic yells, dialed 911 without hesitation. Moments later, red and blue lights painted the white-paneled Carter house in pulsing waves as 2 patrol cars pulled up outside. Officers entered through the front door, which was ajar. The house was still, too still. They found Raymond Carter lying face down on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood, a knife embedded deep between his shoulder blades. His eyes were open, frozen in shock. The pristine linoleum beneath him was smeared with footprints and handprints, but none of them led away from the body. In a dining chair a few feet away sat Linda Carter. Her hands, soaked in blood, rested calmly on her lap. Her blouse was torn at the shoulder, her hair tangled, her eyes glazed over as if she had been staring into something no one else could see. She didn't say a word as the officers approached. She didn't resist when they placed her in cuffs. One of them asked the obvious question, where was Emma? She wasn't in her room, she wasn't in the bathroom, she wasn't anywhere in the house. Her phone was on the nightstand, still charging. Her shoes were missing, so was her backpack. The back door was unlocked. A search team was called in immediately. They scoured the woods behind the neighborhood and checked gas stations, bus stops, and local shelters. Emma Blake had vanished without a trace. To the public, the case was simple. A wife, betrayed, snapped and murdered her husband in cold blood. But Detective Nora Hill, the lead on the case, didn't believe in simple stories. Something about the scene felt off. Linda's calmness wasn't the detachment of shock, it was too deliberate. There was no sign of a struggle with Ray, no defensive wounds on Linda, and yet the placement of the knife, the angle of the wound, it was precise, purposeful, almost practiced. Then there was the question of Emma, a foster daughter gone missing the same night her foster father was killed. Not a coincidence. When Nora reviewed the footage from the camera Linda had hidden in the living room, discovered during the evidence sweep, her suspicions deepened. The short clip revealed enough to paint a disturbing picture of the relationship between Ray and Emma, but it also showed something else, Linda's hand in the events leading up to the murder. She wasn't just a bystander, she had known for days, maybe weeks, what was happening, and she had planned something. Further investigation into Linda's phone messages uncovered fragments of a deleted conversation between her and Emma. The texts were only partially recoverable, but enough remained to raise serious questions. He has to pay for this. If you do it, no one will ever know. I'll take care of the rest. The knife from the murder scene matched a set kept in a locked drawer in the basement, only accessible with Linda's keys, and then buried under a stack of old blankets in the attic. Officers found a second camera. This one faced Emma's room. Someone had been watching for a long time, but it wasn't Ray. The date stamps on the recordings began only a week before the murder. Linda had installed it herself. Detective Hill was beginning to see the outlines of a different narrative. Linda may have discovered the inappropriate relationship, but instead of confronting it or calling the police, she had made a choice. A cold, calculated one. She had used Emma, manipulated her, convinced her that killing Ray was the only way out. But without Emma, the full truth remained out of reach. Who really held the knife? Who planned the escape? What began as a crime of passion was starting to look like something far more sinister, an orchestrated murder, built on fear, secrets and betrayal. Chap 6. 3 weeks after the murder, Emma Blake was found 200 miles away, living under a false name in a rundown motel outside a truck stop in western Pennsylvania. A tip from a clerk who recognized her from a news segment led police straight to room 12, where she was discovered alone, pale and disoriented. She didn't run. She didn't argue. She simply looked up at the officers and whispered, "Is he dead?" Back in Maple Glen, the town buzzed with gossip as Emma's return reignited media attention around the Carter murder. Some painted her as a victim, a broken girl manipulated and abused until she had no choice. Others whispered darker theories, that she had seduced Ray, that she was dangerous, perhaps even the mastermind behind it all. The truth was more tangled than either version. During her first formal interrogation, Emma barely spoke. Hours passed in silence. Then slowly, piece by piece, she began to tell her story. She described how Ray had started grooming her months after she moved in. It began subtly, compliments, late-night talks, small touches disguised as accidents. Then came the emotional manipulation, the threats disguised as love, the promises that only he could understand her. She hadn't fallen in love with him, she explained. She'd been trained to believe she had. But the real shock came when she spoke of Linda. According to Emma, it was Linda who first suggested Ray's behavior had gone too far. But instead of calling the authorities, she quietly built a plan. One evening, she sat Emma down and told her, "If you want out, there's a way, but you'll have to be brave." Linda coached her for weeks on how to act, what to say, how to avoid suspicion. She instructed Emma to allow Ray's advances, to never resist, to create a paper trail of messages and photos that would implicate him. Then, when the moment was right, Linda would arrange the rest: the murder, the alibi, the escape. Emma insisted she hadn't stabbed Ray. Linda had done it after Emma slipped out the back door. By the time she was halfway across town, Linda had already made the 911 call. But Linda told a different story. From her cell, Linda remained stoic. She claimed she had walked in on Ray assaulting Emma and had acted in a moment of blind rage. She denied ever plotting anything. She denied manipulating Emma or hiding evidence. The footage from the cameras, she said, was her way of protecting the girl. She had recorded it all as proof, so no one could question Emma's side of the story. With two conflicting accounts and limited physical evidence, prosecutors faced a dilemma. The knife bore only Linda's fingerprints, but Emma had fled. The texts between them hinted at collusion, but didn't confirm who killed Ray. Public opinion was divided. Was Linda a mother who snapped, or a woman who carefully orchestrated her husband's death, using a fragile girl as her pawn? Eventually, charges were filed against both women. Linda was tried for first-degree murder. Emma, though treated as a minor at the time of the crime, was charged with accessory to murder and obstruction of justice. The courtroom became a battleground of emotions, psychology, and disturbing details. Experts debated the complexity of grooming, trauma bonding, and the limits of consent. Emma's testimony was raw, confusing, and contradictory, sometimes painting Ray as a monster, other times as a man she pitied more than feared. In the end, the jury convicted Linda of second-degree murder, citing her deliberate planning but acknowledging the emotional torment she claimed to suffer. She was sentenced to 25 years without parole. Emma, given her age and history of abuse, was sentenced to a rehabilitative program and 5 years probation. As the courtroom emptied, one question remained unanswered: who had truly pulled the strings? Emma, Linda, or had both women become something else entirely under the weight of Ray Carter's secret life? The truth, it seemed, was not a single story. It was a tangle of shadows, each one deeper than the last.